packaging software for local installation and application virtualization. Shh. Do you hear that? It's the sound of silence. Silence is, well, first of all, it's golden. And silence is also one of the key things that you're attempting to do whenever you go about packaging software for installation with, for example, Configuration Manager. And this is actually, interestingly enough, it's one of the pieces they don't really tell you when they talk about how Config Manager can change the world and everything about how you manage systems. Because if you go to like a Microsoft official curriculum class, they'll teach you how to use Config Manager, but they don't actually teach you how to get software in a way, get it repackaged into a way that it can be deployed with Configuration Manager. And that's honestly one of the big benefits about doing a non-Microsoft course like this one, is because you can get some of that additional best practices and really understand how this packaging process works. As I mentioned, packaging software is all about making it install silently. And that whole silent bit it's in some cases it's not easy. In some cases it involves some pretty complicated sleuthing to try to figure out, well, how do I make this package install silently? In certain circumstances, if it's an exe, for example, exe files are interesting because, well, there's no defining structure behind a setup.exe. You could use the /q switch to make it quiet, or it could be the /quiet switch, or it could be something else entirely, because there really is no standard switch structure for exes. Now, these days we're seeing a lot of these applications that are arriving in MSI format. And MSI format is really nice because, well, whereas there's no structure for exes, every MSI has the same structure. There will be some settings, some characteristics that you may have to add in, some name value pairs that will enable you to set settings at the install time. But for the most part, once you have the structure down, well, you can understand how to install MSIs. Before we even get any deeper than that, we kind of have to spend a little bit of time, though, talking about what really is a software installation. So okay, you've got a computer, and that computer is running Windows, and you double-click setup.exe or setup.msi. What really happens? What's actually going on? There's no magic there. At the end of the day, if you think about a software installation, it's copying essentially files and folders, and it's making changes to the registry. That's really it. I mean, some applications may register OCXs or may register some add-ons into Internet Explorer, but for the most part, even those can be described by, well, these two things. A lot of admins, we've all been installing software for years and years and years, and we maybe don't realize that underneath the covers, when you strip away all the windows and everything, all we're doing is copying files and making registry changes. So the process to make something install silently is essentially getting that piece of software to install without prompting us for any sort of question. I don't want to be prompted for where do you want to install, what path, what drivers do you need to do, do I want it in standard mode or wizard mode. Any of those questions have to happen without prompting the user. This nugget is so critically important for your success with Config Manager, because that process of making stuff install silently is, as I said, not easy to do. And every application will be slightly different. In some applications, it may be easy for you to, at the command line, just define some characteristics for that exe. Other applications, maybe not, they're not the case. Some applications don't actually have any way to make them run silently, so you have to use a tool that repackages that application into one that does. And the repackaging process, and even really the app virtualization process down here at the bottom, those processes essentially watch what the install is intending to do and then mirror that onto the system. Now the result is no questions get asked, and you get that application installed, but that's what we're looking for. We also have the old school switches method, you know, /q or /quiet or whatever the switches are that are associated with that application. I'm going to show you all three of these because you're going to need to know how to use all three of these when you're adding this into Configuration Manager. So, all right, I've got local installation, the classic install an app to somebody's computer. And that local installation is, I mean, we've been doing this forever. It actually copies files. It actually makes registry keys. It modifies the computer's configuration. Because I mean, if I'm going to copy files, I've got to copy files, right? And that modification, while it updates the computer's configuration, it generally works with just about any app. I mean, local installation, like I said, we've been doing it for years. It's the way apps were intended to be installed. This can be a problem, this modification here, especially as we start to think about how Config Manager is going to work with the different machines in our environment. Think about that. With the new Config Manager, I can deploy out an application based on where the user might be, which could have the unfortunate impact of installing applications, extra copies, in places that they don't really belong. So there has been this move towards application virtualization these days. And a lot of people are moving towards app virtualization because in app virtualization, I don't actually modify any computer configurations. There's no modification there. That's why it's virtualized. It sits like a little bubble on top of that computer, and that bubble can make use of the resources that are on the computer, but the computer really doesn't recognize that the application is installed. That makes it easy to provision to various locations. It also makes it very easy to deprovision because nothing changes. The problem is that it may not work with every app. So some applications, app virtualization just simply doesn't work. What's also important is the notion of these cross-app integrations that you'll have to pay attention to. If you think about it, right? If you have a line of business application that has a button that says show me report, and the report spawns an instance of Microsoft Excel, well, the line of business app has to be able to see Excel for this whole virtualization concept to work. And you have to code that into the package that you create for those application integrations to be there. The line of business app has to be aware that the Excel app is also virtualized or available on the machine. So a lot of drawing on this screen here, but all this is designed to help you understand that this process isn't easy. And I'm going to show you some of the guiding steps for how applications get packaged among those three different ways. But my goal here is to help you understand, okay, you've got a lot to learn. So let's actually minimize this. Here is my Configuration Manager server. We're not going to spend any time here. Okay, this package is the one Config Manager client package that was deployed when we installed the server. Before I can ever go about creating a new package here in Configuration Manager, I have to make that package available so it can execute silently. Now we'll talk more about this a little later on. I want you to actually see, if I create a package that is a standard program, what we're looking for right here. So you ever used psexec before, or invoke-command with PowerShell? When you're doing a psexec, what are you doing? You're remotely executing something on another computer. Well, that whole process is essentially what Configuration Manager is attempting to do here by creating a package and a program. The program, the package identifies all of the source files and everything that makes up that application. And the program is something that gets executed. So when you are creating packages and programs, and this is kind of the old method, again, we'll talk about this later, but you are essentially executing some kind of executable at the command line. That can be setup.exe, right? Or that could be, I don't know, ipconfig.exe, or it could be solitaire.exe, whatever you want. The only thing that Config Manager is doing is running that application. That's the focus of Config Manager here, is just simply executing that command line on every computer that is a member of the collection, and that's it. Now, there's more to it. I mean, it inventories things and all of that, but the software deployment piece is focused just here on that component. You should remember that, because as we talk about packages and programs and the old way of doing things, we don't have to necessarily deploy software when we're thinking about deploying software. We can deploy just a script or some executable, launch some executable on computers. Now, before we ever get there at all, we have to learn how to package software. And the packaging process involves a couple of different steps. Now, the first thing I want to show you is the switches concept. I've got here a copy of WinZip. Fairly, common application, gets installed everywhere. And this WinZip 1664, it's a .exe file. And oftentimes, one of the easiest ways to actually figure out how to execute something silently is to just simply switch or search for WinZip install silently. And that may ultimately take you to a location where you can find what you need to know about installing something silently. If I go down here to WinZip's website, well, how do I install winzip.msi? And what are the user requirements? And what are the switches that are used to install WinZip? Here are install a command line using custom MSI exec switches. Down here you can see, well, here's what I need to add in at the command line, if I can make it work, to make that install correctly. So step one here, phase one, involves a little Googling or Binging or whatever your favorite engine is to identify what the appropriate switches are for the application you're looking for. Okay, and a lot of times other people will have figured this out for you, and so maybe you can find on various forum sites instructions for how to make this happen. There does come the time, however, when some applications just simply won't work with switches. Maybe you build it yourself. It's a homegrown application. Maybe whoever packaged it never flipped the switch for make sure you add in the silent stuff. And so consequently, there are no silent switches for installing the application. When that's the case, you're going to need the assistance of a tool set. These tool sets they perform a thing that we call repackaging. And there's one tool set called Scalable WinInstall.le. It's a free tool that you can download right from Scalable's website. And the notion of this tool is that it helps you repackage these applications. Now, there's a couple steps to the process. The first step to the process is to actually go about scanning your existing system. Okay, and from your existing system, we will scan the configuration, figure out what all the files and folders are, figure out what all the registry keys are, and then store them in a little database. Step two involves installing that application to the computer. Then step three involves repeating the scan and figuring out what's different between the two. If you think about it, because an installation is nothing more than a file copy and a registry change, more or less, well, what's different should be more or less the installation all by itself. Occasionally other stuff happens. I mean, who knows? The domain changes a registry key or group policy impacts you or something. But generally what's different between the beginning and the end snapshot should be fairly close to what that installation is. In this tool, and different tools are different, in this tool you start by running what's called a discover. And this discover process actually first scans the computer. So I'm going to create WinZip packaged here. And I choose Next. I'm going to create the folder there. That's my work drive, the C drive. And I'm going to scan just the C drive because that's all I care about. Do I want to exclude any files or do I want to exclude any registry keys? And then Finish. This is going to go through now, as you can see, and scan the entire contents of this computer's hard drive. It's going to look at all the files, it's going to look at all the registry keys, and when it's complete, it will return control back to me to go about installing the application. When it's done, I see that the before snapshot is now complete. And if I click OK, the Discover tool is actually going to prompt me for the installation that I want to install on this computer, which is going to be this WinZip 1664 executable. Now what I'm doing is installing this onto this computer, just like I would normally install the application. You know, turn off the toolbars and the extra bloatware software, answer the questions that I need to, agree to the license agreement, all the usual stuff. Also, when I complete the installation of the application, I can actually launch that application and adjust any settings that I want to make sure or will be adjusted when I deploy the application. Remember, because those settings will actually be captured by the second scan. So with that scan complete, I can, well, let's poke around in here with the app. I'm going to close down the tool tips. I can go over here and adjust any of the favorite settings. Maybe I can come up here and adjust some of the whatever you need to. When I'm done, I can close down that application. Then the final step involves running the Discover process for a second time. This second process does the same thing as the first process, except at the end, well, it figures out what changed between the two. When it's done, it's going to prompt me with, we've got a little, just a warning message here that we've got some shortcuts in common folders. But ultimately, when we're done, I'll see that Discover has created now a new MSI package called winzippackage.msi. In fact, I can take a look at it here. Notice I've got this WinZip package location. And inside of that is going to be essentially all of the files, shortcuts, registry keys, services, individual edits, and some advertising stuff that's changed by the installation of this application. I can see specific information here too, files and folders and whatnot. So ultimately I have now packaged this application. And in fact, if I want, I can go here to, let's see, this is going to be client 1, and then win install, packages, WinZip packaged, and there you have it. There's that MSI file that is now prepared and ready for installation using Configuration Manager. So pretty cool, right? This is a process that you will have to go through with all of the applications that you intend to deploy using Configuration Manager. The third option involves virtualizing that application. So in this case, you'll notice that I've actually installed this app to this computer, right? And if I want to return this computer back to its previous mode of operations, well, I'll have to go here to Programs and Features and actually uninstall WinZip 16.5. So I have changed the configuration of this computer in order to accomplish this. And I'll do that again here whenever we package the next app. But the notion is that when I install this, I'm going to change the configuration in order to install this. I have another machine here. And on this machine, I've actually downloaded a copy of the AppV sequencer. So here in Microsoft Application Virtualization, I've downloaded from the MDOP, the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack, the AppV sequencer application. Now what the sequencer does is very similar to what WinInstall LE does, at least from just looking at it. But it does something very different in the fact that when it deploys the application, it's not going to deploy the application as an install. It's going to deploy it as a virtual application. So let me show you how you package something using the sequencer. If you click here to create a new virtual application package, one of the first things we have to do is choose what we want to package. Now, some applications may actually deliver, along with the application install files, what's called a package accelerator. And what this is essentially a file that contains the commands used for converting the regular software installation into a sequence, or one that's a virtual application. You don't really find that many of these. You can create your own, but most often you'll probably be creating just regular default packages out of installations. If I choose the next button here, what we have at the next step is essentially kind of a gut check on this computer to make sure that it's ready for packaging. Little things like Windows Defender being running. If the SMS client is actually running, that can create a problem. If Windows Search is running, or if you've previously deployed or sequenced a package on this computer and it hasn't been cleaned up, well, then you might get an error message here. Now, we don't actually have any error messages here, so this is a good thing. This actually brings up a very good point. With both this and the other version, it's very important that you use a very clean machine when doing sequencing, because you don't want to, just like before, you don't want to capture anything that's involved with some other application. At the same time, too, using virtual machines here comes in fairly handy, because you can roll back that virtual machine before you intend to do another sequence. So you can see here that we're ready to create that virtual package. If we create the next, or we hit the next button here, we have the option of what kind of package we're going to create. I mentioned earlier that there are these concepts of applications, and then there's some applications that have other dependent applications that they need to rely on. You think about a line of business application that may have, for example, some Java runtime environment that it needs to use in order to execute. Well, that runtime environment may actually be packaged as a form of middleware that will be used by a standard level package. In this case, we're using WinZip, and that's kind of a standard package, so we'll choose the default package here. If I choose the next button, then I need to select the installer for the application, which is WinZip 1664 right here. Choose next again, and I have to give that virtual application package a name. Let's call this WinZip Virtualized. And you'll notice whenever I create this package name, down on the bottom, I actually get a Q drive reference for where the virtual application directory is going to contain the contents of that package. Very, very important. When you go about installing the piece of software here in just a minute, you'll want to install that piece of software actually to that location on the Q drive in order to ensure that everything gets put together appropriately. So keep that in mind, what this location is. In fact, I copied it to the clipboard because we'll need it here in just a second. If I choose next again, well, that's going to go ahead and launch the WinZip installer. Same installer that we've used before. Same decisions that need to be made in order to use this installer, with the single exception of changing the install location to that Q drive. So here's the setup. I'm going to click Setup and answer the questions almost the same as was done before. Get rid of, once again, the bloatware. Notice the reminder down here to install to the Q location for this installation. When the installer comes up, answer those questions just like before. Choose Next, accept the license agreement here, change the destination folder to Q WinZip Virtualized. Choose Next again, typical, improve, yes, all the stuff that you would do in order to install the application. So if it feels like this is a bit more of an easier process, in a way it kind of is. Admittedly, there are some extra effort things that you'll have to do under the covers after we complete the installation to kind of tune this package for deployment. But for the most part, this nice wizard here makes the whole process of installing this application very, very simple. Now, once the application's completed its installation, I can click the Finish button here. And the next step in this process is to let AppV know that we've actually finished installing. So that turns off the watching of what's going on this computer. If I choose Next, that's going to collect up all the system changes, identify what happened as a result of this package, and bundle them all together. Now, when we deploy these virtualized applications, there are a number of different ways in which we can deploy them, one of which is using a process called streaming. And this streaming process delivers the package in an on-demand format down to a user as they request it. And as you can imagine, when the user needs that application, well, it could take a period of time to download that application. So in the streaming format, one of the things that we want to do is actually execute the package as part of the sequencer, the suite sequencing process, to identify what needs to be there first so we can prioritize the data that comes down. In a streamed application, that the DLL files and the exe files that are required to get that package down, those will come down as part of these first use tasks as we execute this package. What also happens as we execute this package, in addition to identifying what needs to come down to start the package going, is any of those specific settings that we want to ensure are a part of that package we can now configure. Again, just like we did before, changing items in the tools or changing options that are associated with this package. You may also want to initiate some of the actions that you normally would right out of the gate with an application as part of this first use tasks portion to ensure that, well, those pieces get prioritized. So once you've done, clicking through here and executing various functions of this tool, close down the tool, and that returns you back to the app virtualization sequencer tool. You'll notice now that we can actually get to the next step because we've actually executed the program at this point. This allows us to go and add those additional functionalities, the additional capabilities into the package, and then gives us this installation report. Now, there are a couple of interesting pieces about this installation report that you should be kind of aware of. One of which is this unsupported shell extension issue. Now, as you recall, a virtualized application is one that sits kind of on top of the operating system, but without actually adjusting its configuration in any major way. And as a consequence, there are some limited ways in which those virtualized applications can and cannot interact with the operating system. So you'll notice here that WinZip actually attempts to register a right-click shell extension into the experience on the desktop. You're familiar with it when you right-click on a folder and it says, zip up with WinZip or whatever it says. Those extensions are actually not supported in the virtual package world, at least with this version. So these are actually going to be taken out from the installation of WinZip. And interestingly enough, that the limitation on that right-click context menu extension is one reason why you may want to deploy a package via an installation as opposed to a virtualization. There are also some files that are excluded from the package. These files were excluded because they're actually located in specific paths that are considered excluded paths on a system. Okay, these are the ones that AppV does not support. So if I choose Next, and at this point, I can either customize the package further or add additional pieces in. We're relatively done at this point. When we're done, we can choose to save the package or continue to modify the package if we want. Once we're ready, we hit Create, and that package ultimately gets created. So this package is ready to go. And if I actually take a look at the Q drive, I can see, actually, not there, right here on the desktop, I can see the package as it has been created and as it is now ready for delivery via Configuration Manager. I've got the MSI file here. I've got a couple of AppV specific files, and I have the manifest file, which is what helps AppV deliver the package via in a virtualized way. So this package here, the WinZip virtualized package, and then the WinZip packaged one that we did previously, will actually deploy using Configuration Manager in the upcoming nuggets. But for now, what have we talked about in this nugget? We've really talked about all the different steps that are required to get packages ready for delivery. And as I mentioned, this isn't easy. This whole process involves kind of hacking around the typical software installation. And whether it uses switches, repackaging, or app virtualization, there are some steps that are required in order to make that package install silently. And that's really the goal here. is in figuring out for the package, what are those steps that will get it installed silently and will also follow all of the business rules that are needed as I end up deploying that package. I've got some decisions to make for each of these packages, whether I want to install them and enjoy the benefits of installation, but also pay the costs of it, or choose to virtualize that package and get the benefits there, but also paying the cost with that delivery method. Ultimately, which one you choose is going to be based on your use case and then also what you need out of that individual application. Coming up next, we are going to take these packages and go through the traditional Configuration Manager installation using packages and programs. And then following that, we're going to spend another nugget talking about the new Configuration Manager way involving applications. But until then, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.